Welcome back, everyone, to OpenLine. We are talking with two people from the Education Trust about an overhaul in basically how education is funded in Tennessee. Their Zooms froze, might have been our Zoom. It froze a moment ago. Now they're both back. Gini, Pupo-Walker, she's State Director with the Education Trust. Reggie, Nash, External Relations Manager with Education Trust. And I was asking, as we left last time, what could derail this? And Gini gave a good answer. And Reggie, what worries you? What could derail this?
Absolutely. So once there's actually legislation put forward, actual bill language that moves through the legislative process, it has to move through committee structures. So in the House, it could move through one of two committees. It could be the House Education Administration Committee, which is very likely, which is chaired by Representative Mark White of East Memphis, or it could be the House Education and Instruction Committee, which is chaired by Representative Deborah Moody from Covington. In the Senate, it could be just one committee, the Senate Education Committee. So as a bill language moves through the process, there's always a possibility that there could be some amendment that is proposed on a bill. An amendment language could propose any kind of significant number of changes. It could change language. It could change components that are brought forward in the bill. Really, anything that's up in the bill is fair game for a potential change by amendment. So that's one thing that could potentially derail a bill. Secondly, as we've seen with many important bills in previous legislative sessions, there's also the issue of the legislation can be brought later in the process. I talked earlier in the segment about caption bills. So there could be placeholder bills that are there, and then language is popped in the final hour. Then there's like just a mad dash to get it to the finish line. So, that can happen where things can be quickly moved along. We know that it is an election year, that there's a lot of urgency to, get back on the campaign trail because they can't do so while they're in session. So any number of things could happen that could really shift how these conversations happen. But we are hopeful and optimistic that there will be thoughtful and really deliberate and intentional in considering any legislation that could affect this funding formula, reimagination.
It's great so far to hear that there is optimism. Even hear Cameron Sexton up here when I interviewed him last week saying, yes, there will be more money, and there does appear to be this optimism. So that's a good thing right now. Let's go to the phones. Let's go to Andy. Hello, Andy.
Hello.
What's on your mind? Go right ahead.
Got a comment and then a question. Comment is, thank you, Education Trust, for being there and putting the time in and the research. I think this is so important, and just really, really appreciate the work that you put in, being experts, being advocates for, I think, the kids and the families that probably have the least loudest voice and presence. So, number one, thank you. Number two, will you all have your eyes on, we talk about the student-centered, student-based formula. Will you all follow the money so that, to the extent possible, we know that funding actually goes to that student that, Gini, you had mentioned earlier? It might be in a rural setting, have dyslexia, and maybe learning English at the same time. Can you talk a little bit about that? Even though we talk about student-based and student-weighted, do we know that we're going to get a receipt that shows the money actually is weighted and adding up for that particular student?
That's great. All right, great question. Gini, what about that?
That is a really great question and a really important one. And I would say that, the genesis of this entire, one of the main reasons this is happening now is because of the very lack of transparency around the BEP. The complexity, it's considered the most opaque, most complex of any formula in the country. And so what we know about a student-weighted funding formula is that it is the radical opposite of that. It is very simple. You are basically, you have a student and you have a funding assigned to that student based on their traits, their characteristics. There are other things that can be added, but primarily we know exactly how much per student each school is going to get, each district is going to get. The good news is there's some experience. Of course, there's I think 38 states in the country have a student-weighted funding formula. So we know, we've seen the research, we know how it's done, we have lots of good models to look to, but we know that when you have a really clear, strong student-weighted formula, you can very easily see how much each district is getting per student, and based on which students they serve. And so if we say you have 30% of your kids are English learners and you're going to get an X number of dollars for English learner students, let's figure out exactly how that money is being deployed. The other thing I will share is that Nashville, for over 10 years, has taken all the money we receive from the state and redirected it, and from the county, into a student-weighted formula. So we already distribute money that way in Nashville and in Memphis, have a lot of experience doing that. And it provides a ton of clarity. Every principal knows at the beginning of the year, these are the kids that I have enrolled in my school. That means I'm going to have X number of dollars. I know exactly what I'm working with here. And the same will be true for district leaders. And so one of the things advocates like us are advocating for is really strong transparency and public reporting. And so we will be pushing, if a bill is passed, to have a very strong public reporting piece to it, so we can see very clearly where money is going, how much is going, how it's being spent, so people can literally follow that dollar all the way down to the student level.
Okay. All right, good. I appreciate that question. Let's go to another call here. Let's go to Matt. Hello, Matt.
Yes.
Go right ahead, Matt. What's on your mind?
I've got a question for the school board member. Can you tell me about your unusual name?
I sure can. So I have a hyphenated name. My father is Cuban, and Pupo is a Cuban name. And so in the Spanish-speaking world, everybody has two last names. And so if you think about famous authors, movie directors, people from Spain, from Latin American countries, they have two last names. Sometimes when people immigrate here, they drop their second name. My father married my mother, and our names they hyphenated them to keep both. And so that's why I have both names. So most Spanish-speaking folks have two last names, and they never hyphenate them in Latin America, but they do here. And Pupo is a Cuban name, and if you are from Cuba, you would know exactly what town I'm from. Holguin, Cuba, lots of Pupos in Holguin, Cuba. So
wow,
more than you probably wanted to know. There it is.
Well, I mean, I didn't expect that question, but that was interesting. Okay,
good one, easy one.
That's very interesting. Okay, Reggie, I'm not going to ask about your name, but I think what you also heard the other question prior to that. I mean, it's so important to kind of track that money. And are you comfortable that's going to be something that we can do? You know, what do you think about that?
Absolutely. Well, right now we know that the Tennessee Department of Education has the state report card, which basically provides a ton of information on school districts across the state, both on staffing, on education outcomes, on demographics, on a host of information about all of Tennessee's public school districts and the students that they serve. So when we think about a robust and transparent and clearly easily accessible funding formula and funding data, we know that there's already a mechanism in place where that information could go. So, you know, in the event that a funding reform bill is passed, I'm sure there would be something that would be built into the state report card that would allow, you know, Tennessee parents, educators, district leaders, and other stakeholders to really take a look at that report card and really be able to track what's happening down to the school level. Being able to see what types of students that districts are serving, the types of students that schools are serving, and exactly how that money is being spent to meet those unique needs in each of our schools. That would be a great tool for advocates like us to be able to see how different schools, how different settings across Tennessee are being served, and also making sure that those students who have historically been underserved are able to receive the resources that they need.
I asked earlier, was there concern by either of you that this could be derailed? And I'm really encouraged by what you said. And we've seen some really, you know, difficult battles up in the legislature. And one thing I was reading over all this stuff, and one thing that came up was, could this be used as a way to sort of exclude certain textbooks or mandate that certain things be taught or not taught? And could this debate over funding kind of lead to that kind of debate, which could then, you know, cause problems? Do you see that happening, or do you see that not happening? Gini, I'll ask you.
Yeah, so I will say that there's not a world in which curriculum conversations will enter a funding reform debate. You will not even, I mean, I don't even know that you would even see discussion about how much is spent on instructional materials. They wouldn't get into that granular level in this kind of legislation. Where I do think it could influence it is if you have some bartering and negotiating with a legislator who says, I have this bill on fill in the blank issue, whether it's curriculum, instruction, whatever that looks like, and wants a legislator to support his bill, or he's not going to support funding reform, that kind of thing. I think that you could see some negotiation in that way. I do think we're going to see a host of bills because it's an election year on these kind of hot button issues. I would like to see us have a much more rational, reasonable, reasoned discussion about who makes decisions about instruction, curriculum, and those are the specialists that are in our schools, in our districts, at our state office. We have a whole process on textbook selection. We have the Commissioner of Education is not part of that process. These are appointed teachers, community members, different folks sit on those textbook adoption committees. All of this process is very public, very thorough, very transparent, and aligned to what we consider very rigorous state standards. I'd hate to see those standards watered down in service to a political agenda that is absolutely not in the best interest of students.
We have 2 minutes left, so I want to give each of you a minute. What's the bottom line? What do you want people to take away? Reggie, start with you. What do you want people to take away?
That this is such an important once-in-a-generation opportunity to review how Tennessee public schools are funded and how they serve students. We know that in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen unprecedented unfinished learning amongst students, both educators, school staff, administrators, parents, you name it, have been affected by the impacts, the negative impacts of this pandemic and the unique time that we see ourselves in. And we have a really unique opportunity here to reimagine, how do we serve our students? How do we, look forward to the future and thinking about how we provide them the resources that they need to meet these unique needs? We know that the BEP has not been reformed in the last 30 years, but we have an opportunity now to think about how we do change things moving forward for the next several decades and generation of Tennessee students to come.
Gini, about 1 minute. What do you want people to take away?
I want people to know that they have not only the right, but the power to call their legislators, their elected officials, and share with them their own personal story, their dreams, their hopes for funding for our schools. Every single Tennessean is affected by this kind of legislation because it will impact who's taking care of you in the hospital, who's fixing your car, who is designing your house, who is running for mayor. And so everyone here benefits from a really well-funded school funding formula. And then the last thing I want to say is I want to send a lot of love to all of our students, our teachers, our educators, our districts in Tennessee are really grappling with this pandemic right now. We know that it's really, really hard. Stay the course, be kind to each other, stay focused on taking care of each other. And the only way we get through this is together.
Amen. All right. Thank you both. We will take a break. I'll come back. Wrap everything up right after this.